What is up, you guys? We are back with yet another awesome film. Today's story starts in 1968, where we are introduced to Sawachiro, and a short while after his mom gave birth to him, his mom passed away. Then about 17 years later, so did his dad. Insignificant for the rest of the society, but very meaningful to Sawachiro, who now feels like he's more alone than ever. But even though he was alone, he never felt lonely, as he had his companion Pete. And soon after, him and Pete would get adopted by Koichi, his father's good friend and fellow professor. Koichi took Sawachiro under his wing, and since he was well educated, he would teach Sawachiro everything he knew about robotics and mechanical engineering. But soon after, Sawachiro loses his new family to a plane crash. Riko, Sawachiro's adoptive sister, went to middle school and started living with her uncle, Kazuto. And now in 1995, Sawachiro was now alone again, and his only companion was his fellow cat Pete. In present day, Sawachiro has become a bit of a recluse. He pretty much works all day in his home lab and doesn't go out much or socialize at all. After training with Riko's father for a while, Sawachiro became a very dedicated robotics builder and now works for a company called FutureWorks Enterprise. One day, as he was in his lab, he found his picture on the news as his partner in the company wanted it for publicity purposes. But the very modest Sawachiro more or less felt embarrassed that people are seeing his face. His partner in the company is Kazuto, Riko's uncle, who finances some of his work. Sawachiro goes on to tell us a little bit about his life, mostly his cat, Pete. Every time during winter, Pete would make Sawachiro open all the doors in the house as Pete searches for a door into the summer to try and avoid the harsh winter ahead. Sawachiro's adoptive sister Riko is soon going to go to college. She comes over from her uncle's house from time to visit Sawachiro, and even though she's got a little bit of a crush on him, Sawachiro is a little oblivious to that fact. One day as she was at his house, Sawachiro's girlfriend, Shiraisa, comes over to have dinner with him. It's obvious that Riko is a little awkward around her, but Sawachiro again is also oblivious to that. Sawachiro started dating Suashira as he didn't want to make Riko worry about him because he was such a lonely guy. And this fact is stated by his girlfriend herself as she notices just how distant and unnecessarily professional Sawachiro is around her. As she was preparing dinner in his house, Shiraisa, who works in accounting, brought some paperwork for Sawachiro to sign. The paperwork, if signed, would be giving Sawachiro some shares of the company that Sawachiro and his uncle own. It was his uncle's idea to do this, and the very meek and timid Sawachiro did not object. But Sawachiro's gullibility in handling his finances and personal affairs would come back to bite him in the ass, as the next morning, his uncle, Katsuo, calls for a shareholder meeting and tells Sawachiro that he's selling some of his robot's patents to another company that's willing to pay big. Sawachiro feels incredibly betrayed by this, as him and his adoptive father Koichi poured their hearts and souls into building the A1 robots that his uncle Katsuo is now trying to sell the patents to. As Sawachiro was enraged and expressing his concerns to his uncle, Shiachira asks for a vote, and thinking that his girlfriend is gonna back him up, Sawachiro agrees. Since yesterday, she also had power in the company as she was a shareholder. But as they vote, she votes and sides with his uncle, as Shiachira and Katsuo have been plotting to steal Sawachiro's work for weeks now. Not only do the two vote to sell the patents to Sawachiro's robots, but they also inform Sawachiro that he's now unable to use any of the company's equipment, nor is he able to work on any of the robots even though he's a shareholder inside the company. And when Sawachiro runs out of the office to get to his home lab, he finds it in complete disarray as the people from the company have taken all of his work. When Riko gets to the house, she finds Sawachiro drunk and wallowing in self-pity. And it is here in the movie that Riko tells him that she's been in love with him for quite a while now. But Sawachiro rejects her on the basis that she is too young and still has to get educated and experience life for herself before she gets involved with anyone else. After she left, Sawachiro kept drinking, but even all the alcohol in the world couldn't really fix any of his problems. And so, Sawachiro decided to go to Cretus, a company that specializes in something called cold sleep. If you're wondering what this cold sleep is, it's basically a hibernation pod where you get to sleep for years and years and never age, and you get to wake up decades after. It's usually used by terminal patients who want to wake up decades after and hopefully find a source of solution for their ailments. And even though Sawachiro wasn't sick with anything, he could no longer stand to live his own life. The process is quite simple, and it could start within the same day. Sawachiro goes to Cretus with his cat Pete as Pete is the only one he had left, and apparently the company can also hibernate cats as well, which is pretty cool if you think about it. But the doctors at the company reject him, saying that his blood alcohol level is through the roof and he needs to be in the right of mind to sign the papers before deciding to throw away 30 years of his life. He's told to come back the next day at 4, and our scene then shifts to Riko, who's just gotten home to her uncle's house. There we learn that Kazuto, Sawachiro's uncle, is apparently having relations with Shiachira, and Riko overhears Shiachira saying that she plans to steal another patent from Sawachiro. This patent that she speaks of is for a plasma battery that never runs out. Riko, thinking that she must warn Sawachiro of this, goes up the stairs to call him. But Sawachiro wasn't home and her uncle catches her, but she tells him that she's going over to a friend's and runs out. Her uncle discovers that she was calling Sawachiro, but as Riko was heading over to Sawachiro's place, Sawachiro has called Shiachira as he was coming to his uncle's house to confront her about stealing away his rights to the patent. As Kazuto follows Riko, Sawachiro confronts Shiachira and tells her he's going to go public with the information that he had, and the company's reputation is gonna tank, and if that happens, nobody's going to buy the patents from them. But Shiachira stabs Sawachiro in the neck with his uncle's insulin capsules, and as he was there passing out from the floor, she tries to catch Pete, whom he had in his duffel bag, as she's always hated Pete and this time it scratched her on the face. But as she follows Pete to a room, she sees that it's climbed out a window, and someone got into Sawachiro's car and drove away. When Sawachiro wakes up, he finds himself in a hibernation pod somehow, and Shiachira explains her master evil plan to him, revealing that she's pulled some strings to own Sawachiro's hibernation pod under the company that they're trying to sell out to. And the next thing Sawachiro sees is waking up inside a lab 30 years later in Japan. When he asks for his cat Pete, the doctor gets Pete inside the room, but Pete wasn't a cat but a humanoid robot. Sawachiro starts to freak out because he doesn't know what's happening, and he demands he be released from the facility right away. But as he was there trying to navigate modern society, he finds it quite difficult as everything was electronic, and as he was grabbing a taxi, this robot, Pete, barges in inside the same taxi and tells him that he has a malfunction and that he's gonna serve him for 5 years, and all Sawachiro has to do is just fix him. Sawachiro goes to Riko's address to find her, but instead he finds Shiachira, who's grown to be very fat and is now abusing drugs and alcohol and lives a very poor life, as the company that she hoped would buy the patents from her went bankrupt after a year, and she starts talking about a man who came out of nowhere to take Sawachiro's shares of the company, even though they were supposed to go to her when he went into hibernation. None of this makes any sense to Sawachiro, but then again, he's not really concerned about shares or money. Sawachiro asks where Riko is, and Shiachira explains that Riko died that very same day 30 years ago from an explosion that happened at Sawachiro's house. After visiting Riko's grave and crying his eyes out, Sawachiro is devastated and now decides to find out the man that Shiachira was talking about, the same man who took his shares of the company that was supposed to go to Riko according to Sawachiro. After a little digging, Pete and Sawachiro find themselves in Gota's company. Gota is really excited to see Sawachiro, and he tells him about this time he gave him this comic book and signed it for him, and it's here that Gota also reveals that Sawachiro finished making the A1 models, and he also finished building the plasma battery that Pete here is now using to power himself with. But none of this is something that Sawachiro remembers. But everything that he was saying led to this man who was really crazy back in the old days, who stole a bunch of money to fund his own research for a time-traveling machine. And with Gota's resources and Pete's help, Sawachiro finds this guy's location. The guy is this very eccentric scientist who's actually built a time machine. He tells Sawachiro that he's waited for him for 30 years, and that Sawachiro needs to time travel back to the past again to make what happened before happen again in this time frame. He straps a bunch of gold plates on his body so that Sawachiro can sell them in the past and fund the doctor's research. But as Sawachiro was traveling back, his companion Pete decides to go back with him. Both of them time travel to 30 years ago, and Sawachiro wakes up to find himself in his lawyer's house. His lawyer has sold all the gold that was strapped to him and turned it into a cash account so that Sawachiro can give it to the doctor in this timeline. And it's here that all the confusion is cleared up for us, as Sawachiro spends his days inventing the A1 robot and the plasma battery. After the invention, Sawachiro gives the rights to his lawyer Sato, And he also finds the crazy doctor inside a restaurant, and he gives him all the money he needs to fund his time-traveling machine. And it is here that he finds Gato as a kid, and he signs the comic book for him, telling him that one day he's going to be a great inventor. As the tragic day where Sawachiro is attacked by Shiachira approaches, we see exactly what happened on that day. As Shiachira chases after Pete the cat, Sawachiro from the future has taken him and driven away. He drives and finds Riko, who was going to his house to warn him, and apparently he was the one that exploded his own house to hide Riko from her uncle, who would have killed her since she knew the truth. He then takes Riko to Sato, his lawyer, and he convinces him to adopt Riko as one of their own. And now Riko's name is changed, and as far as her uncle is concerned, she died that day on the explosion. And all that's left to do now to complete the time frame is for Sawachiro to go into hibernation. Riko doesn't like this idea, but Sawachiro tells her that she needs to grow and live her life as she is still too young to be with him. This time around, when Sawachiro wakes up 30 years after, he finds Pete, the android robot, carrying Pete the cat as everything has gone according to plan. And Riko went into robotics research just like Sawachiro, and 10 years later, she also went into hibernation sleep, and now she's 27, and she wakes up the same day Sawachiro does. And our movie wraps up with an adult Riko waking up with Sawachiro beside her. And that is how our movie comes to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed our recap. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment. I love you guys so much, and I promise to see you on my next recap. Bye.